I never thought I'd admit this, but the people I trusted most nearly destroyed me. For years I stayed silent, terrified of what the truth would cost. Now I'm finally speaking, but some secrets don't stay buried. I used to be the chief surgeon at this hospital. The one who made headlines for separating conjoined twins. My hands saved lives here. But when I showed up at the ER, doubled over with a rupturing appendix, the very same hospital treated me like I was dirt under their shoes. It started the moment I walked in. Sweat plastered my hijab to my forehead, and vomit stains streaked my clothes from the taxi ride. I could barely stand. And yet, when Nurse Brenda saw me, she didn't see a patient in crisis. She saw a woman in a headscarf. She pointed me toward the farthest corner of the waiting room, without a single word. Every step to that chair felt like someone driving a knife into my gut. And while I sat there fighting not to scream, I watched her usher in patient after patient, people who came in long after me, while her eyes skipped over me like I wasn't even there. By the time she finally acknowledged me, the pain was unbearable. And the way she called me up? Not by my name. Not by my paperwork. But by sneering, the religious woman with the headscarf in the back. The entire waiting room turned to watch me struggle to my feet. My legs were shaking so hard I had to cling to the armrest just to get up. During the so-called assessment, she forced me to stand while my vision blurred and the floor tilted. I tried explaining calmly, clinically, that I had severe right lower quadrant pain, rebound tenderness, fever. Classic appendicitis. But she cut me off with a smirk and said, "Your culture exaggerates women's normal monthly pain." She wrote down a body temperature of 95. 95. My actual fever was 102. She was erasing my symptoms right in front of me. And then it got worse. She told her colleague that my type had a different pain tolerance, so it was harder to judge. When I asked to use the bathroom because I thought I'd vomit again, she refused. I had already been sitting there for 2 hours, tasting metal in my mouth, shaking uncontrollably. When she finally called me back up, she demanded ID. I reached for my wallet, and she suddenly ripped the hijab straight off my head. Just yanked it away like it was contaminated. "Proper ID verification requires full facial visibility," she announced, holding my hijab like it was trash. My hair tumbled loose and I felt completely exposed. She made me spin in a full circle while the waiting room watched. Some looked away, but not one person stopped her. Then, as if to humiliate me further, she pressed her fingers into the exact spot where my appendix throbbed. The pain was so blinding I dropped to my knees and screamed. But instead of helping, she scribbled in her notes and ordered me to walk laps around the waiting room to prove I wasn't faking. I barely managed 3 steps before the room spun sideways. My body convulsed while spilling onto the floor. Tears streamed down my face, but Brenda just stepped back, disgusted, and called janitorial. Then she sneered, "If you can't control yourself, you'll have to wait outside." I begged for a bathroom. She said no. I begged for anti-nausea medication. She said no. I told her, with what strength I had left, that I was a doctor and I knew my appendix was about to rupture. That's when she exploded. She accused me of making terrorist threats by pretending to be a doctor. Security grabbed my arms and dragged me toward the door. As she spat at me, she screamed, "Go back where you came from for treatment." They tossed me onto the pavement. My legs buckled, my vision blacked out, and the pain ripped through me like fire. As I collapsed, my old hospital ID slipped from my bag. Chief of Pediatric Surgery, 2015 to 2020. The intake nurse bent down to toss it aside, until she saw the name. Her face drained of color. "Oh my God, you're her. You're Dr. Hassan." Another nurse gasped. "The surgeon who separated the conjoined twins? The 18-hour operation?" Suddenly, everything changed. Orders were shouted, stretchers rushed in. "Get her to surgery now." 6 hours later, I opened my eyes in recovery. And there she was, Nurse Brenda, standing pale and trembling beside the hospital administrator. He asked if I wanted her fired on the spot. I stared at her for a long time. My humiliation, my rage, all of it burned inside me. And yet, finally, I shook my head. No. Not because I wasn't furious. Not because I wasn't broken from what she did. But because in that moment I realized something chilling. Nurse Brenda had no idea what was coming for her. 2 days later, I forced myself to walk back through the hospital's main doors. Every step pulled at the fresh incision across my abdomen, but I held my head high. The same security guard who had dragged me out before recognized me instantly. His face drained of color. Without a word, he stepped aside. I took the elevator to the 4th floor, administrative offices. That hallway felt endless. Each buzzing fluorescent light overhead was like a spotlight, reminding me of what had happened. Staff passed by whispering. Some glanced at me with recognition, others nodded respectfully, but most looked away. By now, everyone in the building knew what had happened in the ER. I stopped in front of the chief medical officer's office. Dr. Theodore Blackwood. Silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a reputation for playing politics as much as medicine. His secretary didn't even wait for me to explain. The second she looked up, she stood and hurried to his door. She whispered something I couldn't catch, then waved me in. Dr. Blackwood rose from behind his mahogany desk. We'd worked side by side for years when I was chief of pediatric surgery. His handshake was firm, though I winced at the pain it caused. He gestured toward a leather chair and I lowered myself into it slowly, careful not to tear my stitches. He studied me, fingers steepled, waiting. I unlocked my phone and slid it across his desk. Pictures. My chart. Notes from the ER. Falsified vitals. The hysteria diagnosis written minutes before my appendix burst. His jaw clenched as he scrolled. Then I pulled out a folder. Witness statements. 3 nurses. 2 orderlies. Even a patient. All describing the same thing, Brenda's humiliation, her negligence, her cruelty. By the time he finished reading, his face was stone. He called for Brenda's personnel file. Within minutes, a secretary returned carrying a thick folder. He opened it, read, and his expression shifted from concern to alarm. He turned the file toward me. 3 previous complaints. All from women wearing hijabs or other religious coverings. All dismissed as cultural misunderstandings. All signed off by the same nursing supervisor. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a one-off. It was a pattern. And the hospital had let it fester. Dr. Blackwood shut the folder and stared out the window for a long time before finally promising to place Brenda on immediate leave pending investigation. But I shook my head. That wasn't enough. Not after everything. Not after the lives she'd already damaged. I stood, ignoring the fire in my stitches. I told him I wanted in on the investigation. I wanted access to the old complaints. I wanted to speak directly to the victims. And I wanted transparency. When he started to argue, I cut him off. I reminded him of everything I'd given this hospital. 5 years of my life. Dozens of residents trained. A reputation built on my surgeries that brought them prestige and international recognition. And when I needed them most, they nearly let me die because of my skin color and my headscarf. The next morning, I arrived at 7 a.m., waiting in the lobby. Brenda's shift started at 8. At 7:45, she strolled in with a coffee, laughing with another nurse. But then she saw me. The smile slid from her face. The cup slipped from her hand and shattered, coffee spreading across the tiles. She froze. Pale. Silent. Her colleague glanced between us, confused. Security didn't need to raise their voices. They handed her a letter. Administrative leave. Effective immediately. Her eyes flicked to me one last time before she was escorted away. That week, I ignored my doctor's warnings and dove headfirst into the investigation. I interviewed the women behind those complaints. Their stories broke me. One lost a pregnancy after 6 hours of waiting. Another nearly died from an allergic reaction Brenda brushed off as dramatics. Each account echoed my own. Dismissal. Humiliation. Neglect. I pulled everything together. A full report. Not just on Brenda, but on the entire system that let her operate unchecked. The supervisor who buried complaints. The lack of cultural training. The missing accountability. But Brenda wasn't about to go quietly. She hired a lawyer, filed a grievance, and spun herself as the victim. She claimed she was following protocol. That I was using my influence for revenge. And then the threats started. Anonymous notes in my hospital mailbox, back off. Stop digging. My tires were slashed in the parking garage. When I asked security to review the footage, the cameras were misaligned. Timestamps corrupted. Every lead erased. Someone wasn't just protecting Brenda. Someone powerful was protecting the system. When Dr. Blackwood called me back into his office, I thought maybe things were finally shifting in my favor. But this time he wasn't alone. Seated beside him was a woman in a sharp black suit who introduced herself as Victoria Jones, the hospital's legal counsel. She didn't waste a second. No small talk, no pleasantries. She slid a paper across the desk with a number written on it. A settlement offer. Enough money to cover my medical bills, lost wages, and then some. All I had to do was sign a non-disclosure agreement, drop the investigation, and pretend none of this had ever happened. I looked at that number, really looked at it. It was tempting, a way out, a way to stop living in constant pain and fear. But then I remembered Brenda ripping off my hijab, laughing while I screamed in agony, and the faces of the other women whose stories I'd heard. I tore the paper in half right there on his desk. From that moment, the resistance against me doubled. Witnesses who once seemed eager to talk suddenly backed out. Documents disappeared from files. The nursing supervisor who had waved away earlier complaints? She suddenly retired before I could get to her. And somehow, Brenda was reinstated to duty after her union filed an injunction. Different department, same smirk whenever we crossed paths. She knew she was winning. But then, out of nowhere, I found an ally. I was in the medical library one afternoon when Dr. Theo Mardinks, a nervous young resident, slipped into the chair across from me. He glanced around, then pushed a USB drive across the table. He whispered that it contained the unedited security footage from the night of my attack. The real footage. He'd pulled it before someone could delete it. I rushed to my laptop and plugged it in. And there it was. Crystal clear video, Brenda yanking off my hijab. Brenda pressing her hand into my abdomen while I screamed. Brenda ordering security to drag me out while I could barely stand. And then, the part that made my stomach turn, her laughing with her colleagues afterward, bragging about teaching me a lesson. But that wasn't all. The drive also had audio clips of Brenda making hateful remarks about Middle Eastern patients, plus emails where she bragged about deliberately making them wait longer. A whole library of prejudice recorded in her own words. Dr. Mardinks explained Brenda had friends in IT who normally scrubbed this kind of evidence, but he had gotten to it first. He was done watching patients suffer. I made copies immediately. One for Dr. Blackwood. One for the hospital board. One for my lawyer, because now I knew I needed one. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about everyone she had hurt, and everyone she would hurt if she wasn't stopped. The next board meeting was in 3 days, and I prepared like my life depended on it. Every testimony cataloged, every file indexed, every failure of the system ready to be exposed. But the morning of the meeting, things went wrong. Horribly wrong. I arrived early, tested the projection system, double-checked my USB drives, and froze. Every single file was corrupted. Blank. Wiped clean. Panic clawed at my throat, but I told myself it was fine. I still had backups at home. I called Dr. Martinks. No answer. Pager, nothing. Then I learned he'd been suddenly transferred out of state. No forwarding info. Just gone. My hands shook as the board members filed in. Without evidence, all I had was my word against Brenda's. And then my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered. Heavy breathing. A whisper, leave now if you know what's good for you. Click. The meeting went exactly how you'd expect. I explained the missing files, Martinks's disappearance, the threats. The board chair's eyes flicked to her watch. Another tapped her pen impatiently. Blackwood suggested rescheduling, and just like that it was over. I was dismissed like a nuisance. And in the hallway? Brenda was waiting. Fresh scrubs, smug grin, and as she passed, she deliberately slammed her shoulder into my fresh incision. The pain nearly dropped me to the floor. When I got to my car, I tried to remotely access my home computer. My files there? Gone. Cloud backups? Deleted. Whoever was protecting Brenda wasn't just powerful, they were technical. Professional. I drove home numb, only to find my apartment subtly disturbed. Drawers slightly ajar. Papers shifted. My neighbor mentioned maintenance workers had been inside earlier, but nobody had called for repairs. Then HR hit me with an email, my hospital privileges suspended. Concerns about my mental state after my surgery. They wanted me on extended leave. In other words, silenced. But I wasn't done. Dr. Sarah Kim, an old colleague, called me in hushed tones and asked to meet outside the hospital. At a small downtown coffee shop, she showed me screenshots, emails between Brenda and her network. Brenda's cousin in IT. Her best friend in HR. Her boyfriend in security. Together they had built a web of protection around her, mocking patients, plotting how to teach lessons, laughing about the damage they caused. Finally, real proof again. I backed it all up, multiple drives, fake email accounts, cloud storage under names they'd never connect to me. But the retaliation came fast. The next morning, my windshield was smashed. A note under the wiper read, "Final warning." Hours later, a text arrived. A photo of my sister's house 3 states away. My niece's swing set in the background. The message, "Nice family. Be a shame if they needed emergency medical care." That's when I realized, this wasn't just about my career anymore. Brenda's network was telling me loud and clear, they could reach anyone I loved. I met with Dr. Blackwood again that night, this time at his home. His living room was covered in boxes, files, documents he'd quietly collected. He showed me everything, Brenda's cousin altering patient timestamps, HR falsifying complaint records, security editing camera footage. Years of corruption hidden in plain sight. They weren't just protecting Brenda. They were stealing money, falsifying payroll, covering up malpractice. Together, we built the ultimate case. By midnight, we had everything laid out in a way that couldn't be denied. Hard copies. Originals. Records that couldn't be scrubbed. But when I left his house, I noticed a car idling down the street with its lights off. I pulled out and it followed. I took random turns. It stayed with me. My heart pounded as I tried to get to a police station. Then the car suddenly accelerated and slammed into my bumper. The impact spun me off the road into a mailbox. Airbags deployed. By the time I came to, the car was gone. Shaken, I still clutched the box of documents like my life depended on it. When I finally got home, my apartment door was cracked open. Inside, drawers were pulled out, shelves overturned. They'd been searching for something. But the documents? They were still in my arms. They hadn't found them. The police told me I should stay somewhere else. That night, I paid cash for a hotel room under a fake name. I shoved a chair under the door handle and sat on the bed surrounded by evidence, trying to figure out my next move. By morning, someone was pounding on the door. Hotel security, they claimed. Suspicious activity in your room. But I knew better. Real security doesn't do that. I grabbed the documents, slipped out the bathroom window, and hit the ground running, incision screaming with every step. Brenda's network had just made one thing clear. They weren't just trying to silence me. They were hunting me. When things got too dangerous, I remembered someone I could trust. Dr. Martinez, an old colleague who had retired the year before. He lived an hour outside the city on a quiet farm, and he'd always told me, "If you ever need anything, call." I prayed he meant it. I rented a car, knowing full well it left a paper trail, but I didn't have a choice. The whole drive, I checked my mirrors. Empty rural roads, but my heart still raced at every shadow. Dr. Martinez looked surprised when I showed up on his doorstep, but he didn't hesitate. He and his wife ushered me in, poured coffee, and listened as I laid everything out, Brenda's abuse, her network, the threats, the evidence. Their faces darkened with each detail. Finally, he offered me the guest room. His farm was isolated, secure, with cameras all around. "You'll be safe here," he promised. For 2 days, we worked non-stop. Martinez combed through records with the precision of someone who'd spent decades inside hospitals. His wife, a former nurse, pointed out the subtle ways Brenda's crew twisted protocol to their advantage. Together, we built a case so airtight it could suffocate. On the 3rd day, Dr. Blackwood called Martinez's landline. His voice was urgent. The hospital board had scheduled an emergency meeting. Brenda's group had pushed too far. Their fraud triggered an automatic audit, and outside auditors were already on site. This was the opening we needed. I drove back into the city the night before. Instead of home, I checked into a hotel near the hospital under a different name. I stayed up late, rehearsing every word of my presentation, organizing every file until it was flawless. The next morning, the hospital parking lot buzzed with tension. More cars than usual. Some I recognized as board members. Others belonged to the external auditors. Security tried to block me at the door, citing my suspension, but then Dr. Blackwood appeared. His voice was sharp, final, "She's my consultant." Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Staff whispered as I walked past. Outside the boardroom, Brenda was waiting with her cousin and her HR friend. They were whispering frantically, and when she saw me, her face twisted with pure rage. Her cousin actually held her back. That alone told me she knew this meeting wasn't like the others. The boardroom was packed. On one side, 5 board members grim-faced. On the other, 3 external auditors, laptops open, pens ready. Blackwood and I sat at the end. The board chair, a sharp-eyed woman who wasted no words, opened the session. The auditors went first. They laid it out with clinical precision: $40,000 in fraudulent overtime, systemic manipulation of records, destroyed files. Each revelation hit like a hammer. Then it was my turn. I handed out copies of everything: patient testimonies, falsified charts, screenshots of Brenda's messages bragging about targeting patients. I walked them through my own ER incident, the falsified vitals, the humiliation, the nearly fatal neglect. Then the broader pattern: 3 years of discrimination against women in hijabs, patients mocked, denied care, left in danger. The board members flipped through page after page in silence. One auditor scribbled furiously, another snapped photos of key documents. The tension was thick enough to choke on. When I finished, the chair asked if Brenda wanted to respond. The doors opened and she walked in with her lawyer. She denied everything, of course. Claimed the evidence was fabricated. Painted herself as the victim of my vendetta. But then the auditors pressed her. How did she explain the overtime discrepancies? The altered timestamps? The missing complaints? Brenda stammered. Her cousin couldn't explain the computer fraud. Her HR friend broke down in tears. Through the glass doors during recess, I watched them arguing in the hallway, the cousin gesturing wildly, the HR friend sobbing. When we reconvened, Brenda's lawyer invoked union rights and refused to answer more questions. But the damage was already done. The board voted unanimously: expand the investigation, suspend everyone involved, notify law enforcement. Brenda's face turned ghost white as the decision was read aloud. Her fortress was collapsing: cousin, HR friend, boyfriend in security, all suspended, all facing criminal exposure. But she wasn't finished with me. As we left, she broke free from her lawyer, stormed up to me, and hissed through clenched teeth, "This isn't over. You'll regret this. I know where you live. I know where your family lives." Her lawyer physically dragged her back, but the venom in her eyes, it burned. Dr. Blackwood walked me to my car, promising hospital security would watch her, that the police had been alerted. But deep down, I knew Brenda was right. This wasn't over. Her network might be fractured, but allies still lurked in the shadows. People who believed her story. People who thought I was the villain. In the days that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire. Some staff thanked me for speaking up. Others accused me of destroying innocent careers. The hospital was divided. Reporters swarmed. Hospital discrimination scandal made headlines. Brenda's lawyer hit the airwaves, painting her as a scapegoat. Protesters even gathered outside the hospital chanting her name. And then the first crack appeared in their wall. Her cousin in IT cut a deal with prosecutors. To save himself, he confessed everything: the data manipulation, the deleted complaints, the years of falsified documentation. One by one, the lies unraveled. Depositions revealed Brenda's HR friend burying files. The security boyfriend caught hoarding backup tapes to blackmail colleagues. And then the footage surfaced. Raw, unedited video after video of Brenda mistreating patients. Mocking them. Targeting them. Denying them care. When that footage hit the table, Brenda's entire demeanor changed. The arrogance drained away. The smirk vanished. For the first time since this nightmare began, she looked afraid. As the investigation deepened, more victims began stepping forward. An elderly Sikh man who'd been denied pain relief. A young woman in a niqab turned away even though she was clearly in distress. Each testimony stacked on top of the others, building an undeniable pattern of discrimination. The hospital's insurance company finally got involved. To them, this wasn't about justice. It was about liability. They saw millions of dollars at risk, and their lawyers pushed hard: settle fast, terminate the problem employees, put some shiny new policies in place, and cut their financial losses. But Brenda's union didn't back down. They staged rallies outside the hospital. Protesters waved signs claiming she was an innocent nurse being railroaded. The media latched on. Some opinion pieces framed it as discrimination in healthcare, others as a labor rights battle. And me? I was caught in the middle. The hospital made me an offer too. A settlement. All medical bills paid. A substantial payout. A public apology. But in exchange? My silence. They wanted me to sign a non-disclosure agreement and vanish from the story. My lawyer told me to take it. It's security. It's closure. Why keep fighting? And yes, it would have been easier. But what about the others? The women who lost pregnancies. The patients mocked and dismissed. The elderly man denied medication. Could I really leave them behind? So I negotiated. I told the hospital I wouldn't take their money unless they also created a victims fund, mandatory cultural sensitivity training for every staff member, independent ombudsman to handle complaints, and public acknowledgement of their failures. They caved. At a press conference, the board laid it out: no admission of wrongdoing, of course, but enough for the public to see real change being forced. 3 months later came Brenda's criminal trial. Not on discrimination, but on fraud. Federal prosecutors had built a devastating case: falsified timesheets, forged signatures, stolen overtime pay. I took the stand, describing how I uncovered the fraud while investigating my own near-death in the ER. The prosecutor presented the evidence I'd compiled. Brenda's lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, but the documents, the cold numbers, didn't lie. Her cousin, desperate for leniency, testified against her. He detailed how she roped him into altering records, how they split the money. Other employees spoke too. Nurses who'd been threatened, doctors undermined, all describing the toxic culture Brenda had built. Brenda testified in her own defense. She cried, said she was overwhelmed, that it was all cultural misunderstandings. She denied it all. But then came the cross-examination. Her own emails mocking patients. Texts coordinating overtime fraud. Bank deposits that matched stolen hours. One by one, her excuses crumbled. The jury deliberated 2 days. Verdict: guilty. Fraud. Conspiracy. Every count. 6 weeks later, sentencing. 3 years in federal prison for Brenda. 18 months for her cousin. Probation and service for the HR friend. Probation for the security boyfriend. The hospital itself faced civil suits that cost them millions. Board members resigned in shame. And Dr. Blackwood? He became the new CEO, tasked with tearing down the rotten culture and rebuilding it from scratch. I met with him one last time. He offered me a role, not just back in surgery, but overseeing diversity and inclusion reforms. At first, the thought of returning to those same halls sickened me. But then I realized this was my chance. My chance to make sure no patient ever went through what I had endured. I accepted with conditions. Direct access to the CEO. Full investigative authority. A real budget. The board approved every demand. Walking those hallways again was surreal. The same corridors where I'd been ignored, humiliated, nearly killed. Now I walked as someone whose voice carried weight. I built anonymous reporting systems for staff and patients. I created advocacy programs with volunteers from different communities. Cultural training became mandatory, from janitors to surgeons. Some people resisted, even transferred out. Fine. Let them. The culture was changing, brick by brick. Brenda's network dissolved. Her cousin left the medical field, his name destroyed. The HR friend lost her certification. The boyfriend in security disappeared from healthcare entirely. Meanwhile, our reforms spread. Other hospitals took notice. Programs were copied nationwide. Brenda served 2 years before early release. She was barred from nursing. Last I heard, she was working retail in another state. Did prison change her? Did she feel remorse? I'll never know. And honestly, it doesn't matter. Because the system that protected her? That's gone. I still operate part-time. My hands never lost their skill. But now I also fight in another way, by ensuring every patient who walks into our hospital is treated with dignity, regardless of who they are. The scars from that night faded, but the memory never did. I turned that trauma into purpose. Today, my story is part of hospital orientation. New staff learn exactly what happened, and why it must never happen again. The hospital where I almost died became the place where I found my calling. Not just as a surgeon, but as an advocate. As a voice for every patient who couldn't fight back. And if my pain, my humiliation, my fight, if all of that ensures even one person never goes through what I endured, then it was worth it. If you enjoyed today's drama, just imagine what's waiting in the next one. Hit like, subscribe, and let's go find the next train wreck together. Thanks for watching.